I think this is one for the history books here, and it's going to be fascinating to watch because it's the culmination of so many long-term megatrends, basically, in terms of debt and money creation and government spending. So you take all those things, put them together, and 2024 is maybe going to be the inflection year when people figure out that that doesn't work and start looking around for what's next.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for December 25th, 2023 through January 1st, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 1 10th-ounce gold maples at just $30 over melt with a minimum order of 5. Next, we have silver eagles at $4.99 over spot, making this a great time to swap silver bars into silver eagles at the lowest premium in years. Finally, Constitutional 90% silver is just $3 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend John Rubino from rubino.substack.com. Rubino, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey Elijah, great to be back.
Well, it's great to have you, and I'll put a link in the description of this video to your Substack channel, which I find very insightful to read the articles there. I did want to discuss the gold market today and what we're seeing as we end 2023 and go into 2024. It seems like there are some major shifts happening. Obviously, on a technical level, we're pushing towards that $2,100 level that, we haven't successfully closed above that level yet, but it seems like we're sustaining levels above 2,000 pretty well. And we're also seeing, again, central bank buying, which is a trend that we've seen this year, and also major retailers like Walmart and Costco starting to actually move into the space and selling precious metals, and also legal tender laws we're seeing across the U.S., states making gold and silver legal tender. So your perspective on this, the price action that we're seeing breaking into new highs, and also this, it seems like, move by the mainstream to go into precious metals.
Well, yeah, you just named 4 or 5 things that all constitute individually tailwinds for gold. In other words, they're good, other things being equal, and they would give you higher prices unless something else happened that was more important. But you put them all together and you get a very strong tailwind. There's just a lot of things pointing towards higher gold prices going forward. And, in the short run, of course, we've got seasonality right now. And usually January and frequently February are good months for gold for reasons that, your guests have covered a bunch of times on your show. But beyond that, like you said, central banks are suddenly aggressive buyers of gold, and they've got, you wouldn't even call them deep pockets. They've got basically unlimited pockets because they can create as much new currency as they want to and just use that to buy gold. So they're shifting in a lot of cases, out of dollars and into gold with their foreign exchange reserves, their monetary reserves. And they're doing this in part because the dollar is not trustworthy anymore. The U.S. is using it as a weapon. So by loading up on, say, treasury bonds at your central bank, you're kind of choosing sides in the world. And a lot of countries don't want to choose sides in that way. And gold is neutral. So you're not making a political statement necessarily when you put gold in your central bank's reserves. So that's happening. And it's happening on a big scale. It's something like 1,000 tons of gold will have been bought after we're done doing the accounting in 2023. That's a huge number in context of a, 3,000 to 4,000 ton annual production market. Costco and Walmart starting to sell precious metals. That's also a potentially big deal because Costco started it, and they found that they sold out of gold bars within hours after they listed them online, which means there's a lot of pent-up demand there. And it's kind of impulse buying demand. In other words, you didn't necessarily go on Costco.com with the intention of buying a gold bar, but you saw it there and thought, well, why don't I add that to my shopping list? And so now Walmart is doing the same thing with a much bigger selection. If you look at their precious metals page, they've got a lot to offer, including silver. So basically, precious metals are becoming an impulse buy. and there's a ton of pent-up investable cash out there right now. Something like 0.8% of global investable capital is in precious metals right now. So let that just go to 2%, which is still historically a low number for precious metals exposure. And you more than double the demand for precious metals. And that's a market that can't handle that kind of an increase in demand. You would see silver in particular just go straight up like it does every 20 or 30 years. So we could see easily, $50 to $100 silver just based on these kinds of trends. So 2024 is looking like an interesting year for precious metals. There are macro reasons to be worried in the short run, in other words, the first 6 months of the year. But I think a lot of things are coming together to make precious metals a lot more in demand and a lot more interesting and a lot more lucrative of an investment than they have been lately.
When it comes to what we're going to see in 2024, obviously we are seeing these major trends making precious metals more mainstream, but it seems like the Fed may be starting to ease as well in the new year. So how do you see, if I know you have talked about kind of historically how when we see Fed easing, this is bullish for precious metals. Your take on that?
Yeah, that's something I should have mentioned before. I kind of got lost in all the other bullish signs for precious metals. But yeah, historically, gold starts to go up when the Fed stops raising interest rates. Whereas equities, for instance, go down for a while until the Fed cuts interest rates dramatically. But gold starts to go up sooner because, it anticipates easy money in the future and people start buying ahead of time. And that's where we are right now. The Fed has kind of sort of promised not to raise interest rates anymore. And they're talking about cutting interest rates several times in 2024. The reason for that is twofold. One is that they see a recession coming. We'll talk about in a minute. I'll tell you why they see that. And it's an election year. So probably, they got a phone call from the White House saying, if you guys ever want any part of any future political system, you're not going to be raising interest rates right up to a presidential election where we need to be reelected. So the Fed feels that pressure. And more than likely, they'll respond to it by cutting interest rates maybe more than people expect right now, because 1 or 2 quarter% cuts in the year ahead won't do a thing to revive the economy. So they're going to realize that and start panic cutting at some point. Well, that's, at some point that becomes good for equities again. It's not yet, but that's very good for gold and silver. So we could see a kind of a 2009, 2010 environment where precious metals, maybe they go down temporarily with equities, but then they just take off once it becomes clear that easy money is basically here. And this time around, we've got kind of a unique monetary policy environment in which cutting interest rates is going to say to the world that interest rates can never again go up to these levels, because we saw what happened. Government interest costs just went parabolic, just spiked from several $100 billion a year to $1 trillion a year. Personal interest costs of what individuals have to pay on their debts did the same thing. It went from $200 or $300 billion a year to $600 billion a year straight up. It didn't even take a year in order to cover that ground. And it'll only go up as long as interest rates stay at this level, which means consumers will be more and more impoverished, less and less able to spend to drive the economy going forward. And that's what we're looking at. We've got these big imbalances out there, tracing from excessive debt colliding with higher interest rates that have to be changed. Those things have to be worked off in a dramatic way. And I frankly don't see any way to do it. I think this is very possibly the time when people figure out that extremely easy money is basically the new normal forever, regardless of what that does to inflation. And then people think back to 2022 and what it was like to have prices go up by 10% in a single year, and they're going to act accordingly. You'll see hoarding and you'll see aggressive moves into real assets and out of financial assets. So I think this is one for the history books here, and it's going to be fascinating to watch because it's the culmination of so many long-term megatrends, basically, in terms of debt and money creation and government spending. So you take all those things, put them together, and 2024 is maybe going to be the inflection year when people figure out that that doesn't work and start looking around for what's next.
Now, there are a lot of trends that you see, even like with debt, for example, that seem to be, there is no solution to it. You know, the end game would be catastrophic for the financial system. Now, I did want to ask you about ways that people can prepare. Obviously, precious metals, stacking precious metals is one way that people can prepare. You've also talked about on your website recently, another term I think coined by Scott Adams of the Dilbert comic strip, skill stacking. So how do people stack skills, and why do you think in this kind of scenario, really having more skills is better than specializing? Because that's really the trend nowadays. People want to specialize in one thing. They get a PhD in a tiny little area. So how does skill stacking really help and could help in a collapse scenario?
Yeah, okay, to take a couple of steps back before getting into that, Scott Adams coined the term skill stacking and talks about the concept of it in terms of career development. He says that a handful of mediocre skills combined are much better than one area of expertise mastered, in the sense that if you add public speaking ability, for instance, not great public speaking, but just the ability to get up in a room at a conference table and make a cogent point. If you add that to any other set of job skills, you immediately level up your attractiveness as an employee. So the more useful skills you don't necessarily master, but become conversant in, the more successful you are in a career. Now, we can apply that to basically prepping for hard, chaotic times in the same way. One strategy, the specialization strategy financially, is basically to invest aggressively and accumulate so much money that anything that happens, you just pay somebody to take care of it for you. And that's an attractive way of doing it. I mean, if you invest brilliantly and you're rich, you really can pay handymen to handle all the details of your life. Most of us aren't quite that successful as investors and able to accumulate massive amounts of cash in that way. So we have to decide whether to just hope, we can get through what's coming. In other words, in order to, manage food if the food supply chain breaks down, or to be able to heat our house if there's a long power outage because the grid isn't what it used to be, or on and on. Protect yourself if the cops don't necessarily come anymore when you call. Those are all things you could pay people to do if you have a huge amount of money, or you could develop basic skills in all of those different areas and be able to handle it yourself. You start a garden, which, by the way, is not easy to do. A lot of people think that, well, food is harder to get, I'll just start a garden. Well, it takes years to be a successful gardener. So you should be starting that now. You should be making the beginner's mistakes today, learning from those mistakes, and becoming conversant in how to make, say, 20% of your family's food in the backyard with self-defense. You don't think, well, I'll just go buy a gun or knife if things get crazy. No, you learn how to use a gun right now, and you do other things in terms of self-defense that up the odds of you being able to protect yourself and your family if the world gets really chaotic. And so it goes on and on. You take the skills that might make the difference between a comfortable life or between survival and the opposite. And you figure out how to do those things. And then, so in other words, you stack survival and prepping skills, one on top of another, over time until you're basically pretty competent about life. And you don't really need society to take care of you. You can mostly do it yourself. And, the appeal of that is one, that it absolutely works. You don't have to become an expert in gardening or in firearms to be able to do those things well enough to make the difference in a crunch. And the information is all out there. You don't have to sit around thinking, oh, I'm helpless in a world that's spinning out of control. You can start learning about these things right now, and devote 6 months to each one to be getting to getting basically conversant in them, and then do them better and better going forward. But there are online courses. There's this online school called Udemy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I think it's Udemy. But they offer courses and all this stuff. You can find Gardening 101 courses for $50 or $75 or whatever. And there's all kinds of firearm and self-defense related videos on YouTube. You don't even have to pay for those. You just pull them up. You can do these things. And the appeal is, one, that it works, and two, that while you're learning a new useful thing, you're behaving positively. You're taking control of your situation. And that's psychologically awesome. If you're becoming more and more competent in things you need, your attitude is almost by definition positive. You're not sitting back waiting for the world to happen to you. You're imposing your will on the world. And that's absolutely the way winners think and the way survivors think. And it's completely doable. It's right out there waiting for you to do it.
And you mentioned in the article that if we do have some sort of collapse scenario, it may be, even if you have the money, it may be hard to actually get the help that you need. So it's really important to grow your skill set because we really don't know what the future brings. And it's not like we can just buy everything, even if we did have the money.
Yeah. Well, South Park has a great episode about this where the locals in the town of South Park, they have their college degrees and they're very good at being a lawyer or a biologist or whatever. But they don't know how to fix anything. They never learned how to, rewire a lamp or anything like that. So they're calling the handful, relatively small number of handymen desperately in need of help. And the handymen start charging more and more because they're in such demand, and they become the elites of society. And in the end, they're competing with each other on like space programs and things like that, the way Bezos and Elon Musk compete with each other today. And that's, taking an idea to a logical extreme, but only, part way. It is going to be true that when things get really crazy, if you take our envisioning of the world of the future and take it just a little bit further than is maybe absolutely highly likely, you get a world in which the cops and the firemen don't come when you need them, and the repairman is swamped, so he can't fix your washing machine. The handyman can't come and fix that hole in your drywall or fix that electrical socket that doesn't work anymore because they're so busy. And you kind of have to do those things yourself if you want to have access to whatever it is needs fixing, So it does make sense to start learning things. And it, makes sense to watch that South Park episode because it's a nice motivator. If you're somebody like, frankly, like me, who really isn't that handy, watching something like that, it kind of lights a fire under you to want to get out there and learn how to do those basic things. So I recommend watching the episode and then looking up the classes that you need to fill in the blanks in your own expertise.
Now, we're talking kind of on an individual level here of how we've become dependent on, other people in society, which I think in some respect is a fine thing. You can grow community, you can make friends and know who can help you in these circumstances. And I think that's a fantastic thing. But when it becomes we're just outsourcing everything and not really knowing how to do things ourselves, I think that can be an issue. And I think on a global level as well, that's kind of the trap that individual nations have fallen into, is this desire for maximum efficiency and then specialization on a national level, and the interconnectedness, which sometimes can be a good thing, has become a bad thing in a lot of respects. And people have been pushing against this. And, you see the rise of populism, of nationalism, which I guess is a response against globalization. Your perspective on that trend we've seen on national levels, and specifically, you wrote an article on Vivek Ramaswamy, who's an up and coming guy, pretty young billionaire who's not going to be the next president, but you see this popularity that he has, and you see this movement of really deglobalization. Your perspective on that?
Well, yeah, globalization was an incredibly efficient, a really, really favorable, nice environment to create and to live within. But we took it too far because it assumes it's based on world peace. Everybody has to pretty much be getting along for a supply chain to be able to traverse 10 different countries before it gets to the final destination market. Because you take one country out of that supply chain and the whole thing breaks down. And now we're in a world where, you got to blame the U.S. for a big part of this, where we're stomping around the world using the dollar as a weapon and creating proxy wars wherever you look, and sanctioning everybody who disagrees with us. And that is antithetical to smoothly operating globalist systems. So globalism is breaking down. Everybody's trying to pull their factories back home, either to their trusted neighbors or to the actual country itself. And what that means is that we have this long period of extremely expensive transition. First of all, so inflation is going to be higher than it would be otherwise, but it's something that's absolutely going to happen. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy is somebody, like you said, he's not going to be president this time around. He's 38 years old. He's running a campaign in which he's an outsider who has maybe 6% in the polls. And, clearly Trump is going to get the nomination this time around unless the deep state sabotages it in some really fundamental way. But one thing Ramaswamy is doing really well is he's thinking through ways to present an American first agenda that's palatable to a pretty broad range of people out there. He's kind of minimizing the whole social issue battles that basically are imposed on us by the aristocracy to keep us distracted from what they're doing to steal money from everybody. He's kind of finessing social issues, and he's presenting a really cogent view of what an America First agenda is going to look like. So he's not going to win this time. And who knows, he might never win. Because I think, he has this challenge coming up where if his poll numbers rise to the point where he looks like a threat, then stuff is going to come out. The deep state or the aristocracy or whatever you want to call them will try to destroy him in some way. And who knows what the material is and whether it's effective or not. But that's still a challenge that's coming. But what he has accomplished, and what no one can take away, is that he's put these ideas and these ways of presenting these ideas out there for anybody, any populist politician who comes along now can look at Trump, who won with a populist platform, and look at Ramaswamy, who's created some really nice talking points on these issues, and combine those two politicians' attitudes and ways of speaking into an excellent platform. If you're a state senator candidate in a purple state, you've got a really nice chance of building a coalition using Vivek Ramaswamy's way of wording things and Trump's attitude that might just win for you, and everybody's seeing that. So basically what they've done is Trump and Ramaswamy, what they've done is they've showed that there's a market niche that can be exploited in politics, and they've showed how to exploit that niche. So I think you're going to see a lot of mini Trumps and mini Ramaswamys come out in less important elections, and they're going to do pretty well, And I think that becomes the main central platform of the Republican Party going forward. And I think that a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats are going to start adopting some of these ideas too. So Ramaswamy is much bigger than his poll numbers indicate, because he's creating material that anybody can steal and that will probably work. So in that sense, I think he's somebody we should pay attention to. He's an interesting guy who's consequential.
No, it seems like then we're kind of seeing a revolution against globalism here. I want to ask you, how much does this matter? Because people point out, we have the Republicans and Democrats, and a lot of people see it just as the red team and the blue team, right? And that in the long run, it doesn't really matter because the financial issues are going to overtake everything, and we're going to see this collapse based on the amount of debt that we have. If you look at the past presidents, each president seems to add more and more debt, right? So how much do you think this actually matter? The politics actually matters when we have this situation, which seems like, in a lot of people's view, that we could just see economic catastrophe ahead.
Yeah, well, it matters in the sense that it helps decide who gets to rebuild from the rubble. So when the financial system tanks, as it's going to, like you said, we've kind of baked a huge financial disaster into the cake by borrowing too much money. We can never raise interest rates again. Therefore, we can never combat inflation again. And once prices start picking up, as they have to in a onshoring economy, if you got to build new factories from scratch, they're going to be more expensive than what used to be run in China. So we're going to have inflation. And that's going to lead to the financial system spinning out of control. And then comes the currency reset and all of that. That's going to happen. But at the bottom of the process, when we're looking at a absolutely decimated financial system and trying to decide where to go from there, it matters who's making those decisions. And if it's a new generation of kind of populist, kind of sound money, libertarian-ish politicians, then we're going to come out of it in much better shape than if it's a bunch of big government, national security state, socialist politicians, which is what we would get. If it happened today, we would basically get the deep state in control. If it happens 3 years from now, after the dominant strain of politics in the U.S. takes a big move towards populism and libertarianism, then there's a chance that we go back to sound money and constitutionally protected individual rights. And in other words, we go back to 1776. Or when the Bill of Rights was created and enacted, which that's very different from where we are today, and it's I would put it at a 30% chance of happening, best case, but the odds improve to the extent that we have Ramaswamy type politicians in charge of a lot of different states and cities, and possibly a big chunk of Congress. So it matters, because we're not looking at what happens next year, really. We're looking at what happens several years from now when things are really falling apart. And we want the right people to be in charge when that happens.
I think, and that's, I feel like, been similar to my view as well, is even though we do have kind of a red and blue team and a lot of the policies are similar, I think it's still important to make your voice heard, right? Because there are issues that actually matter. And like you say, we're also talking about a general trend of politics rather than just any individual election. So I think, in this environment, I know people can get discouraged, but I think it's still important to do what we can on the local level and, in the general elections to make our voice heard.
Oh, absolutely. Because we shouldn't focus on how broken everything is. Because that's unfixable, and if you just focus on, all this debt and it's going to lead to inflation, it's going to lead to this gigantic crisis, it's going to lead to geopolitical this and that, that's very depressing. And, it makes it hard to get out of bed in the morning if that's your reality. But if your reality is, okay, the crisis is coming and we're going to live long enough to have a chance to fix it. And how are we going to do that? well, then that's a lot more interesting, energizing proposition, because we go back to the skill stacking that we talked about earlier, and then we go further back to the investing that we should be doing to be able to have capital when the time comes. So those things are taking place with a purpose, which is to be consequential when there's an actual choice between a global dictatorship modeled after the World Economic Forum or global free market sound money system in which individuals are actually, or individuals have the kind of freedoms that we thought were our birthright. We could, with some luck and some hard work, get back to something like that. And if we want to be a part of that process, then there are certain things we can do to get ready for it. So in that sense, it's kind of a Noah's Ark attitude. Don't just sit there because the world is flooding. Build that boat and prepare to be among the survivors, financially or otherwise, after things really spin out of control.
Well, John, if people are interested in learning more, they can go to rubino.substack.com. Can you tell us a bit about your work there?
Yeah, that's a newsletter on Substack that, first of all, you can sign up for free to check it out. The focus is on mostly actionable stuff like we talked about today, skill stacking, investing in precious metals, things like that. So the idea is to develop a lifestyle, via a community of people who are all paying attention to this stuff, and that takes you towards that goal of being relatively self-sufficient and relatively resilient when the time comes. And so far, so good. It's been 1 year. On January 3rd will be the 1 year anniversary of that Substack newsletter. And the community that's coalesced there has been very interesting and very fun to work with.
Fantastic. Well, we always appreciate having you on the show. I'll, like I said, put a link in the description of this video to your Substack channel. And once again, thank you so much, John Rubino, for joining us today. And you have a very happy new year.
Great. Thanks, Elijah.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for December 25th, 2023 through January 1st, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 1 10th-ounce gold maples at just $30 over melt with a minimum order of 5. Next, we have silver eagles at $4.99 over spot, making this a great time to swap silver bars into silver eagles at the lowest premium in years. Finally, constitutional 90% silver is just $3 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.